Welcome to the Power of Partnership podcast. I'm Riane Eisler, President of the Center for Partnership Systems. This podcast brings you voices from the partnership movement. People using partnership practices to build a world that values caring, nature, and shared prosperity. The Power of Partnership podcast is hosted by Cherry Jacobs-Pruitt, a health policy and partnership scholar. Today, Cherry interviews author Jennifer Parker on the role that culture and the domination paradigm play in abusive and controlling behaviors. And now, on to today's POP podcast showing how increasing this awareness can help heal the world.
So before I welcome today's guest, I want to share with our audience that today's episode is part one of a two-part series on coercive control. In today's episode, we'll be discussing how the power imbalance that is inherent to the domination paradigm shows up as coercive control in relationships. Then in part two, which will be released in 2 weeks, I'll be interviewing Kate Amber, founder of End Coercive Control USA, about the issues coercive control introduces into the family court system. So now I'd like to, on behalf of Riane Eisler and the entire Center for Partnership Systems team, welcome Jennifer Parker to today's episode of the Power of Partnership podcast.
Thank you, Sherry. I am delighted to be here. And I am just honored because I have followed Riane's work for decades now and really have found it very valuable in terms of thinking about our institutions as well as our intimate relationships. So thank you for having me.
So Jennifer, can we start by you sharing a bit about your journey that's bringing you here today, including how and when you first learned of Riane Eisler's work?
Absolutely, and pleasure to share that. So I first learned about Riane Eisler's work through The Chalice and the Blade, and I was going through a very difficult period. My marriage was ending with all the crisis, the feelings that come up about that. And I was asking myself, what happened? Really looking at myself, looking at my marriage. And that book really spoke to me because it really opened my eyes to how domination values happen in our culture and then how they permeate intimate relationships. Well, at the same time period, I began doing a practicum at a domestic abuse shelter. And I didn't think that I knew anything about intimate partner abuse. And much to my surprise, I identified with them a lot more than I thought. And that was because I had experienced some domination in my marriage. I experienced it in my childhood home, growing up with my parents, those kinds of things. So that really opened my eyes. And so I really became inspired to empower other survivors of intimate partner abuse through that experience at the shelter. So when I went to be trained as a therapist, I sought out a place that I could actually specialize in that as well. In my work, I began to develop a curriculum, first of all, of materials for intimate partner abuse. And then I decided, it's so rewarding to see people blossom and to really connect with what helps to empower them. I decided that I'd like to write a book. And so I wrote Coercive Relationships, Find the Answers You Seek, over a 10-year period. So it was while I was busy doing therapy. But then what I discovered is all of Riane's other books. So years later, I discovered what she's written about domination systems in the school, how we teach, how we educate, in religious institutions, in the political, in our economics, and certainly in our family. And so I really connected all of that with my work. It really helped to empower people experiencing abuse in their partners to not take on that shame of it being, this is a personal issue and they're to blame for that, but seeing it more as this is something that exists in our society, and that as domination values and systems get taught, to varying degrees in our families. We take those messages, we see it in education and so forth. And what I found, I using her work, I identified 4 basic assumptions that underlie intimate partner abuse. Those 4 assumptions are, first of all, that there's only so much power, it's finite. So if one person has power, that means you can't have any. And then there is a belief, an assumption that if you are going to be powerful, it has to be power over others, over things, rather than we each have power within, and we can share power. It's possible to share power. And there are institutions, many times in which that happens. Partners can do that. And then diversity is threatening is the other third one. So if you don't agree with me, or if somebody comes from a different culture or something like that, that somehow that's threatening, that you have to put down that other, you have to create some fear about it. And then the last one, kind of all 3 of those feed into some people have more worth than others. And what I found is that the beliefs and the behaviors of people who used abuse against their partners really followed from those assumptions. And when I did a survey with some of my clients, they said yes. And so, like, for instance, I'm entitled to get my way all of the time, and your needs and values or your feelings do not matter. And operating, they might not say that, but they behave that way. And so they really identified with that. And so helping them to begin to tell their stories, as Riane talks about, story is so important. The messages we give in our society are so important. And so beginning to help them to see that their story really mirrors what happens in domination systems in our society. And so that really, I can talk more about that, but those beliefs really help free people from shaming themselves about it. And instead, they begin to empower themselves and with partnership, looking at partnership values.
Jennifer, what is coercive control?
That's a good question. So coercive control is a term that came from Evan Stark and his book called Coercive Control. I think he was the first one who used the term. And it is a pattern of behavior, so not a one-time incident, but a pattern of behavior that is designed to reduce the civil rights, to dominate, and to reduce the civil rights of a partner. And of course, this happens in our society, as I just mentioned, but we'll just talk about with partners. So it's a pattern of behavior that does that with fear, things that cause fear. And that could be emotional fear of losing the relationship too, but also fear of physical danger, fear of being left, whatever it might be, and dependency. It creates dependency on that other person, oftentimes includes isolating from other people who might be resources for them. And so that is what coercive control is. And the beauty to that term is it speaks to more people, because when you talk about domestic violence, many people don't see that as what is happening because maybe they're not being physically abused. But what we know is that the emotional abuse, the 10, there are 12 in my book, but 10 of them are emotional, mental abuse, and that is the most damaging to people. That if you can control through that, you don't even need to use physical abuse.
So let's talk a little bit more about the book and what can readers expect to find?
First of all, this is my book, by the way, and I named it Find the Answers You Seek because I really kind of modeled it on answering some common questions. And the first one is, what is coercive control? Is my relationship really abusive? Because oftentimes they go back and forth. So there's material in there that helps them with that. And another one is, why does my partner harm me? Why does my partner hurt us? And looking at, that's when I begin to look at those 4 assumptions that I mentioned. I begin to get into the domination paradigm and how that's where their partner's behavior is coming from, why they behave the way they do. They say they love you, and we don't get into, well, no, they don't love you, but you certainly don't like how they're loving you, but this is why. From there, I also give, I answer, what does it look like in other ways? Because oftentimes survivors would come in and they would say, well, this thing is going on at work and it feels really crummy. It kind of feels like what my partner was doing, so there can be workplace abuse that happens. It can happen. Domination happens certainly in our political and economic institutions in the form of racism, all kinds of other oppressions. And so helping them to see that there's this domination paradigm is really driving all of that, and helping them to see that it's not about them, not to take it personally, but also to give them ways that they can empower themselves, like coping strategies for dealing with it. I also look at, so how can I go forward? Okay, this is happening. I don't like this. They make their decisions about what they're going to do about it. But how can I go forward in my life and not just be stuck on talking about what happened in my abusive relationship? And it identifies many, I call them roads in the book, but roads that they take because they learned in their families or in their society that somehow, for instance, if they're a woman, that they need to be totally responsible for their relationship, that they need to take care of other people, that they can't take care of themselves, that somehow that's seen as selfish. So that was a lesson. Or it could be, I need to take care of this abusive person because look at what happened in their lives. And they may have had things that were really very tragedies that might have harmed them when they grew up, but that doesn't excuse their behavior now. And so looking at that road, or looking at why is their self-esteem not so good? So different roads that they take. And then ending with really helping them to look at how they can heal, beginning that healing journey.
Right. You are listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We hope you are enjoying today's episode and you will consider joining our family of sponsors. Or you can help us attract sponsors by downloading, following, or subscribing to the series, and liking and rating each episode you view on YouTube. We also would love to hear from you, including if you have a partnership story that you would like to share. Reach out to us at center@partnershipway.org. And now, back to today's episode. So the target audience for the book is survivors, people who are currently wondering if they're in a coercive relationship with coercive control taking place, or is it for also equally for professionals working with those individuals?
It is also for professionals working with those. I've had many therapists say that they found it very valuable in terms of their own understanding, but also there are reflection opportunities throughout the book so that this is heavy stuff. Okay. So it's like you don't deal with this. You don't just flip over a new leaf. That's just not how change happens. And so there are pauses for people to kind of consider different things and how it applies in their relationship. And that's helpful for therapists to hear about. It's also really helpful for people who are concerned about somebody. Learning more about what they're facing is very, very important so that they don't mistakenly get into asking questions like, well, why don't you just leave, and that kind of thing that isn't helpful at all.
So can you share now a bit about the programs that you're currently working with, either with survivors or other professional therapists?
Definitely. So I'm, of course, doing a lot of social media work, getting the word out about my book that I mentioned. So Coercive Relationships. And the other big thing that I do is work with therapists on how to be effective in terms of doing work with survivors of partner abuse. And so I do workshops. I've done courses through a university, and I hope to actually develop a virtual course that people can do on their own. That's something that's kind of in the works. The other thing I do is I publish a monthly blog. So those who are interested in learning more or getting support could subscribe to my monthly blog, and I think you'll have the links for that.
Yes.
And there's also a newsletter where I include resources that are helpful, not just to survivors, but like to professionals who are working with them. And I'm currently also working on refining my group curriculum, because groups are so powerful. They're so empowering to people. And so I want to encourage more of those kinds of groups going. And so I'm refining that curriculum so that I can get that out to those therapists who are interested.
I wonder if there's anything else you'd like to share about the impact of Riane Eisler's work on you or the survivors with whom you work with.
Oh, yes. Well, therapy is a process. And certainly in therapy, we really nurture, we care, we use a lot of what the partnership paradigm is about. And as we do that work, you can see people really lighting up, connecting, figuring out that stopping apologizing for everything that they do that really isn't anything that they have control over. One woman that I can think of later in my career was an older woman. And many times people feel like, well, when they're older and they've been in an abusive relationship for so many times, they're probably not going to leave. But what I saw along the way as this woman took in information about what coercive control was and identified that with what was happening with her partner, and she started looking at how she could cope with that and what did she want to do with that, she ended up leaving. And it was so beautiful to see that pathway. It couldn't happen right away. And initially she came in saying, she didn't call it coercive control, but she had a sense it wasn't okay. And she just felt beaten down and hopeless about being able to change her life situation. And she'd been in therapy before, and the therapist seemed to think that she should leave, and she wasn't ready for that. And so as she was able to walk her own path through that, and with the information about what are healthy relationships, and that she is not responsible for her husband's behavior, and that it is abuse, when she would kind of question that, then that really empowered her.
Nice. Thank you. So for our listeners and viewers, I will be sharing all of the resources that Jennifer has mentioned during today's episode in the show notes, and along with, of course, the link to the Center for Partnership Systems, where you can always dig deeper into Riane Eisler's cultural transformation theory, the domination-partnership social lens continuum, and of course, the 4 cornerstones that really are those levers for change in all societies of childhood and family, gender, economics, and narratives and stories that we've been speaking about a bit today. So Jennifer, I wonder, before we close, if you have any final words that you would like to share with our audience members.
I do. So we all can help heal the world through our partnership values. And if you are a person who knows someone who has experienced, or you think they might have experienced, intimate partner abuse, I really encourage you to know that listening to them, offering them understanding, empathy, asking questions, including is there anything I can do for you? Or how can I best help you? And what you may hear from them is just listening. Do not ever undervalue that in our society, because when we are heard, when we are recognized as worthy human beings, because that's what we communicate when we listen and we empathize, that is so empowering. That's a wonderful beginning. So frequently, and as a therapist, sometimes I would feel a little helpless too when there was something that I was concerned about that was going on. But just know to kind of sit on that uncertainty about it, And instead, don't try to offer to solve it for them, but instead ask questions, ask, what can I do? And offer them, say, do you know about this? Do you know about that? Instead of you should. And I think we were talking about earlier about a shirt that I had that says, shouldn't a survivor. And so you never want to do that because you don't know, you haven't walked in their shoes. You don't know what they're facing. They know what is safe for them to do and what they're ready to do. And so what you can do is listen and support them. And that is really, you're using the respect, the care, the nurturing. That is what partnership is all about. Partnership paradigm, right? So, and I think that carrying that into the world, whether it's to somebody experiencing abuse or whether that's just everybody, that's how we're going to heal the world.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We're grateful to Rising Appalachia for the use of resilience as our Power of Partnership theme music. If you would like us to feature your partnership story, or if you would like to be a proud sponsor of the Power of Partnership podcast, please contact us at center@partnershipway.org. We hope you enjoyed this episode and will leave us a review on your favorite podcast channel. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released every other Tuesday. I'm Cherry Jacobs Pruitt. See you next time on the Power of Partnership podcast.
I am resilient. I trust the movement. I negate the chaos. Uplift the negative. I'll show up at the table again and again and again. I'll close my mouth and learn to listen.